44,000 people have been killed in Gaza, most of them civilians. It's been a terrible tragedy for Gaza, but also it's isolated Israel more than you might have imagined a year ago. Isn't it time for the right pressure to be put on Netanyahu to end this Gaza thing and try and come up with some sort of solution for the Palestinians and rebuild?
I wish it was as easy as that. You do realize that on October 8th, or for that matter, yesterday or today, all Hamas have to do is give back 101 hostages.
That's so crazy because, like, they have suggested that since October 10, and there's only one party that has refused to negotiate and has time and time again disrupted the ceasefire negotiations. You know, interesting that that party is not being mentioned here. The party that also simply has all of the cards. They have all the power. Interesting. Strange.
Hostages, and it's done. That this is about Hamas attacking us, taking the hostages, doing horrific things, building themselves inside the civilian community. I'm not saying it's an easy, simple one. I do think that we have to find a resolution. I don't think anybody should be using right now the terms of peace. I think that that's a challenging one right now. But yes, to arrive at an end to this overt, horrific fighting.
Maybe Hasan, thank you very much.
Yeah. We later found out that Hamas had offered on October 9 or 10th to release all civilian hostages in exchange for the IDF not entering the Strip, but the government rejected the offer. This is what's so interesting and so striking about, like, news reporting coming out of Israel. Times of Israel is not like an anti-Israeli institution. They're just simply reporting on things truthfully, more truthfully than American mainstream media or Western mainstream media is reporting on it. The idea that, like, it's actually Hamas that is refusing to broker peace or a ceasefire in this circumstance is completely nonsensical. But of course, there's a good deal of pre-existing biases that many people have that cause people to just look at the situation and take for granted what America's foreign ally is saying against America's foreign adversaries that are non-state actors. I was talking to a friend of mine who said that any reasonable party in the position of Hamas would have agreed to an unconditional surrender and removal from governance with the amount of people dying and in crisis. Do you think Gazans would not agree to some sort of conditional surrender if they could? Is Hamas not in a position where total surrender is a much better outcome than to keep fighting? This is not in the hands of Hamas at this point. It has always been in the hands of Israel. Guys, do you not understand what's going on? Israel has destroyed all semblance of normal life in the Gaza Strip. They are permanently annexing North Gaza right now as we speak. They are conducting a genocide. What makes you think that the people that are right now defending themselves against this genocidal force are currently in the wrong? Like, this is not October 7, okay? We're not talking about October 7. We're talking about an October 7 style situation occurring on a daily, if not a weekly basis for the last year. It's so crazy. They've already started the partitioning process. The notion that, like, the guys that are fighting back in the process of, like, this ethnic cleansing campaign are in the wrong and they need to stand down, like, with no guarantee whatsoever that, like, Israel is going to actually not complete its genocidal project is so ridiculous. So you would say that Israel would not agree to laying down arms, full surrender, and release of the hostages? I also believe the cards are in the hands of Israel, but our understanding of a full surrender is not possible. No, why would it be possible? Israel killed the civil governance faction's principal negotiator in Tehran. Dudes that, like Ismail Haniyeh is not a part of the militant faction within Hamas. He is responsible for the civil governance. He was also the principal negotiator, and Israel executed him alongside, you know, hundreds of thousands of civilians. We don't even know the full number of the casualties at this point. They've destroyed virtually every single building in the Gaza Strip. What makes you think that there is going to be any stopping, anything that stops them from doing so? Israel is not a rational actor in this process. That much is clear. They have not shown that they are rational actors, and instead they've only shown that they respond to military pressure, as in when they engage in a war of attrition, they've shown time and time again that, like, their economy surrenders and then their forces incur too many penalties, and that's the only time where they back down. Look at all of the other look at all of the other places where, you know, there has been some kind of civil negotiation. Look to the West Bank if you want to understand what it looks like when when your civil governance division that is supposed to represent the interests of the civilians living there, when they become a de facto part of the Israeli security apparatus. The Palestinian Authority comes to mind. The Palestinian Authority is the second most unpopular entity in the region in the eyes of the Palestinian population. And there's a good reason for that. Yeah. Meanwhile, you have this, like, IDF is gearing up to remain in Gaza until the end of 2025 at least. This is what it looks like. And they're gearing up to partition Gaza and resettle Gaza. So I don't know how people just don't understand that. Like, they hold all the cards in this process. The idea that the Israeli government actually cares about what happens to the hostages is also a laughable notion. They do not care. If they cared about what happens to the Israeli hostages, they wouldn't be killing the Israeli hostages with their endless bombing campaigns. Like, what are we talking about? How many hostages have they killed so far? The idea that, like, oh, dude, if they stand down, if Hamas stands down, like, Israel will stop is ridiculous. They're going to say they have to settle to protect the border communities. They have to occupy to protect the settlements, etc. It's vile. Yeah. Israel does not package its offensive military actions by simply stating what it is. Israel is never going to be like, we're settling Gaza because it's our God-given land and it's our right to have it. And these Arabs are barbaric and they should leave. Some people in the cabinet will say it, like Itamar Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich. But by and large, there is a lot of propaganda makes it seem like this is a necessity. And that propaganda is, and this is the same thing I described to you about, like, all politicians, specifically Republicans. People are always shocked when they're like, well, you know, they say they want to make America healthy, and I believe them. And it's like, yeah, of course they're going to say they want to make America healthy. They're not going to say we want to destroy the FDA so that we can deregulate your food supply. Why would they say that? Republicans are not going to run around and be like, they're not going to say we want to make life significantly worse for poor people because we are directly in the pocket of big corporations that we deregulate the economy over at their behest. Like, they're not going to say that. They're going to find a way to propagandize their position and their policies. And it's the same principle for the Israeli government as well. The Israeli government, in the way that, especially in the way that they frame this kind of stuff to the Western world, will never say, like, oh, we have to settle this land because it's our land. God gave us this land. Even though, like I said, there are rabid ultra-Zionists within the security cabinet, within the governing faction that will say those things. But especially when it comes to, like, Western media, in their Western media focus approach, they're always going to say, we have security concerns. They are going to repackage their colonial interests under the auspices of valid security concerns. Israel has a right to defend itself is exactly that, okay? When people say Israel has a right to defend itself, that's what they're talking about. This is it.
Video shows Israeli rollers, bulldozers, and trucks paving a new...
If Hamas conceded, it would be over. What deal are they expecting at this point? Wait, what? What the f? Tell me what Hamas wants to do. How do you justify that? Any terrorist organization that acts that way would get the same reaction. It would end if Hamas concedes. Hamas can't represent the people of Gaza. Yeah, okay, big dog. Okay, I'm going to unban this person. Hamas is but a name. Hamas is the current evolution of Palestinian resistance. You might not like their methods, okay? I've certainly been critical, but that doesn't change the reality. You are outflanking members of the Israeli cabinet, the Israeli war coalition, that have also come to that same fucking conclusion, like you're a goddamn Bibist, despite the fact that you will probably be exactly the type of person that says, oh, I hate Benjamin Netanyahu. How dare you say that? The idea that, like, Hamas is a unique entity is silly. Okay, you kill everyone in Hamas. Now you have Hamas too. How do you think Hamas started? How do you think Hamas became the governing faction and the governing coalition in Gaza? If you don't understand the history of it, and if you refuse to understand that, like, of course people are going to fight back against constant oppression and constant death and destruction and constant violations of their human rights, yeah, people are going to fucking try to fight themselves out of that corner, especially when they realize that there is no negotiating. That is the last 30 years of the so-called peace process and the analysis that the Palestinian population has succumbed to. That is what they recognize.
Road along the Gaza-Egypt border. They're building a new buffer zone known as the Philadelphia Corridor, and the Israelis are there to stay. Here is what it looks like during the day. New realities on the ground are being designed, realities that hint at Israel's endgame for Gaza. Zooming out, we can see Israel building road networks all across the Gaza Strip, with some being kilometers wide, including a buffer zone around the edges of the enclave. These will be fortified with checkpoints, watchtowers, bases, and other surveillance tools. Using these strategic corridors, the Israeli army will be able to monitor any point in Gaza without necessarily occupying the entire territory. The idea is that in post-war Gaza, whenever Hamas fighters surface from underground and prepare to fire rockets, the Israelis would detect them in no more than a few minutes and launch a counterstrike. The Israeli leadership believes these corridors would make further Hamas transgressions improbable in the long term, or at least decrease the damage
Splitting one concentration camp to 3.
they can inflict. The Palestinian civilian population would be able to return, though they would reside within smaller chunks of territory, each disconnected from the other. Conflict is like that. The hand that wins gets to draw the map. Meanwhile, a second front has gone hot in the north. Israeli forces have entered Lebanese territory, and Iran responded by firing missiles at Israel. The battle space is expanding. However, while all eyes are elsewhere, the Israeli master plan for Gaza is going ahead at full speed. I genuinely believe that seeing all sides is paramount at times like this, which is why I asked Ground News to sponsor this video. Following Iran's missile attack on Israel, some 600 articles were published worldwide. And while I appreciate that I can see perspectives from on the ground in Iran and Israel itself, at the same time, Sinwar's right hand, Rawi Mushtaha, is now confirmed to have been killed in an airstrike, along with other key Hamas officials. One by one, Israel is taking out the existing Hamas leadership. Just a few dozen articles were published on this, and it appears to be a blind spot for left-wing media. With everything that is going on in Lebanon and around the world, a story as
I'm doing ethical reacts, man. What do you want me to do? Is Ground News trustworthy? I think they use their metrics for left, center, right, and like their media biases from that fucking Koch brothers funded stupid ass report that put me as like worse than Alex Jones. So I don't know how credible they are, but overall, I mean, I don't really get dinged on these platforms anyway, but I assume it's decent otherwise, maybe. I don't know.
as important as this will simply drown in the background noise. So I appreciate that Ground News surfaces these kinds of stories.
Yeah, I think they say CNN is as far left as InfoWars, right? Like the list is really fucked up. Worse than Alex Jones, where's the lies? Yes, I am worse than Alex Jones. Look, I'm gonna be honest with you, brother. If you at any point have entertained that, wait, hold on. Doors open. If you at any point have thought that I am even remotely similar in my commentary to someone who was sued for billions of dollars for routinely and serially harassing the families and victims of a mass shooting by claiming it's not real, you have to really reorganize your priorities and maybe take a deep breath and wonder what communities you're a part of that cause you to believe this, because I fear that they are leading you astray.
.news/Caspian to learn more or scan the QR code on the screen. Subscribing gets you 40% off the Vantage plan. That's the one I use. Also, by subscribing, you're directly supporting my channel. While our missions align, YouTube revenues alone don't cover the expenses to make these videos. So I especially value our continued partnership and encourage you to check it out. The link is below.
Son, this was genuinely a bad take.
No lube, no...
Israel and Hamas are battling in the open while navigating a political minefield behind closed doors. Much of the negotiations converge around the configurations of Israeli buffer zones within Gaza in the form of extrajudicial corridors. Netanyahu is adamant about 2, but a third one is already under construction and 2 more are in the pipeline. Using these corridors, Israel will have the means to permanently dictate life in Gaza while giving its troops the flexibility to deploy quickly throughout the enclave. One of the primary sticking points in the negotiations so far has been the Philadelphia corridor, specifically who will control it. Measuring roughly 14 kilometers in length and 100 meters in width, the corridor bisects Gaza's Rafah municipality and Egypt's Sinai region. It runs from the Mediterranean Sea to the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is the meeting point of Gaza, Egypt, and Israel. The corridor also includes the Rafah crossing, the only transit point between Egypt and Gaza. However, this crossing has been opened and closed repeatedly throughout the years, depending on the security circumstances. Under the 1979 agreement, Israel was allowed to deploy limited armed forces in the corridor, but no more than 4 infantry battalions, including the appropriate military infrastructure. However, Israel was not allowed to deploy tanks, artillery, or anti-aircraft missiles. So the operation of the Philadelphia corridor was coordinated mainly by Egypt, and this arrangement formed a fundamental component of the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. In 2005, Israel withdrew its army from Gaza as part of a disengagement plan. This exit included a withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor, as well as the withdrawal of about 9,000 Israeli settlers living in 25 illegal settlements in Gaza. Egypt then assumed full responsibility over the Philadelphia corridor, and the Palestinian Authority was later brought into the mission. Shortly after, a second legal agreement was signed between Egypt and Israel, allowing the former to deploy 750 border guards to patrol the corridor for counterterrorism and non-military purposes. Egypt's responsibility expanded, and it was now tasked with preventing smuggling and infiltration. 2 years later, in 2007, Hamas took complete control of the Gaza Strip and removed the Palestinian Authority from the region. Israel responded by enacting a land, air, and sea blockade of the Gaza Strip. Nobody was getting in or out without Israeli say. Egypt, meanwhile, would intermittently open the Rafah crossing during that time. Stuck in between Egypt and Israel, Hamas opted for a new strategy. It started building tunnels between Gaza and Egypt's Sinai. This underground infrastructure was used for smuggling goods and weapons, but the scale was enormous. Between 2011 and 2015, Egyptian forces destroyed more than 2,000 of these Hamas tunnels, and these were only the passages that were detected. Using these tunnels, Hamas created new realities on the ground. The Rafah crossing was no longer the sole entry and exit point to Gaza. More importantly, neither Egypt nor Israel exercised any control over the tunnels. Netanyahu and his cabinet have identified the Philadelphia corridor and the Hamas tunnels running underneath as the single weakest link in the chain surrounding Gaza. So, when the current hostilities started, Israel took back control of the corridor in May 2024. It is now insisting on maintaining a presence there in order to prevent Hamas from replenishing its lost resources. Netanyahu's cabinet argues that without Israeli control over the Philadelphia corridor, Hamas will rearm and build up its military force and infrastructure in a few years. This then will turn Gaza into a long-term security liability for the state of Israel. Hamas...
I mean, this is like, so far, this has been, dare I say, a little biased in the direction of Israel.
Sees it differently. Its negotiators demand that all Israeli forces be pulled from the corridor and that the area return to Hamas control as part of a lasting ceasefire. Egypt, too, is not happy about the continued Israeli presence in the corridor. The Egyptians argued that permanent, large-scale Israeli military presence in the area would violate the 1979 peace treaty. Technically, they make a valid point. The Philadelphia corridor has been a buffer zone between Egypt and Israel for more than 4 decades. It has been maintained through 2 bilateral agreements between Egyptian and Israeli diplomats. Various compromises have been floated since May, including the withdrawal of most Israeli forces in exchange for the installation of Israeli watchtowers along the borderline. However, Egypt has rejected the proposal.
How is it biased? Genuinely asking? Yeah, constantly framing the Israeli incursions in security agreements, or rather like security methods, including implementing this like incredible blockade over the Gaza Strip after withdrawing its military in 2005 under the auspices of a valid security concern, is basically the same repackaged propaganda that says Israel has a right to defend itself. That's all it is. And of course, it's something that you hear all the time. It's the only thing that you hear from most mainstream outlets. So it's always shocking to hear it from independent media as well, but I don't know. Like, this video is supposed to be Israel's endgame for Gaza, but so far it's describing every action that Israel's taken within a biased framework, not really considering like what the situation looks like for Palestinians across the board and like how we got here. It's a little bit disappointing, but
While Israel can't just return the situation to what it was before the current hostilities, the Israelis feel that they need to ensure the security of their border communities, and so they're going about it unilaterally by paving the entire
yeah, you don't understand. The potential security threat of Hamas is more important than the occupation and the genocide of the Palestinian people. Israel's defense trumps all. Who gives a fuck about the Palestinians' defense? Yeah. If Palestine has a right to defend itself, then so does Israel. It is not propaganda. It is the truth. Yeah, if Israel actually cared about Israeli defense, though, and Israeli security, they wouldn't be maintaining a fucking apartheid. Yeah, there would already be a singular, solitary, secular state where Palestinians and Israelis, in the way that they currently exist, could have equal rights, equal civil liberties. But that is a non-starter for many people who defend Israel, I assume yourself included. And you will say, how can we be around these barbaric rapist monsters? We can't. That's the issue. And it always goes back to the same first principles. You do not see Palestinians as normal human beings, just like you, with ambitions, with goals, with dreams, but instead a hive mind of barbaric anti-Semites who want to do mass rapes and shit. Also, yes, Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself under international law because they are a belligerent occupier of the Palestinian people. So thank you, Jay Mershon, for mentioning that. That is also true. Israel quite literally does not have a right to occupy the West Bank illegally, and it certainly does not have a right to, once again, bomb belligerently the entirety of the Gaza Strip in the interest of defending itself. It does not have that international right. The irony here is that Israel is in direct contravention of international law. And that's precisely the reason why there is an ICJ court case launched by the South African government against the Israeli government for conducting a genocide, and also the ICC court case simultaneously against those who are the top genocidaires. Saying Israel has a right to defend itself against the Palestinians is as ridiculous as saying Russia has a right to defend itself against Ukraine, and that's why they had to invade Ukraine. It's even worse than that, because at least Russia, with the exception of Crimea under international standards, would not even be considered a belligerent occupier until now. Now they are a belligerent occupier of Ukraine. So on that front, it would be akin to Russia permanently annexing parts of Ukraine that they have overtaken so far, and then bombing the shit out of that in the counterinsurgency campaign that they run when the Ukrainians inevitably go back to understandably fighting against their Russian occupiers a couple years down the line. Here's Francesca Albany speaking on exactly this, okay? UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories.
Defense can be invoked when a state is threatened by another state.
This you can technically say Israel can invoke this against Iran, for example, and vice versa. Iran can invoke this against Israel.
Which is not the case. Israel has not claimed that that has been threatened by another state. It's been threatened by an armed group. Qualify it the way you want, but it's an armed group within the occupied territory. And frankly, even saying the war between Gaza and Israel is wrong, because Gaza is not a standalone entity, it's part of the occupied territory. But so, in particular, Israel cannot claim the right of self-defense against a threat that emanates from the territory it occupies, from a territory that is kept under belligerent occupation.
No, I don't want to see her on Piers Morgan. I'm sorry, guys. That's ridiculous. You're like, hey, this brilliant voice of truth in a sea of madness, how about we put her in the Shark Tank, strapped and strap her with a bunch of like bloody meats onto her body, and then let's watch that process. It's like, no, I would rather see her in very different settings than fucking the clown show of Piers Morgan. It's crazy.
Essentially, Israel now calls the shots in the Philadelphia corridor. Israel's endgame for Gaza is to dismantle Hamas's presence and ensure that no buildup can ever happen again. Controlling the Philadelphia corridor is essential to that plan, but there is more to it. Further north sits the Netzarim corridor. It was established as a result of the current hostilities. Measuring about 6 kilometers in length and 2 kilometers in width, the Netzarim corridor stretches from the Israeli boundary to the Mediterranean Sea. It also bisects Gaza City from the rest of the Strip. The name itself, Netzarim, is a hint towards the future. Netzarim was one of the illegal Israeli settlements that existed in the Gaza Strip before the Israeli withdrawal in 2005. So the reintroduction of the name hints the Israelis might consider renewing efforts at constructing new settlements in Gaza. Some high-ranking Israeli ministers, such as Ben Gvir, have suggested as much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm done with this. I'm done with this. There's no positive end in sight.